Welcome to the Way of the Lion Narnian Apologetics course. We've already tackled The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe with reference to truth claims, logic and the gospel. Here we turn to the second published book, Prince Caspian. This book is connected with Mars, war and intrigue, and is full of martial references. We're going to look at it from the perspective of battling worldviews. In this first session, we will discuss the worldview that we are subjected to on a day-to-day basis. Our aims for this session are to compare the education that Lewis describes Caspian receiving with our own, to carefully consider what lessons we are daily presented with, and contemplate a few ways that our gospel presentations can be sensitive to our cultural milieu. Almost every time Lewis mentions education in any of his works, it is to decry its faults. Indeed, he wrote a whole book on the subject called The Abolition of Man, which warns against the subversive influence schools have in making pupils less able to rationally reflect their own motivations, thus abolishing the human element in them. In Caspian, we see this replicated in the Narnian paradigm. We're going to consider how this agenda was fulfilled in the description of Prince Caspian's education, and then what impact this may have on our own modern experience. Since the golden age of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Narnia has been occupied by a race of men called Telmarines. Caspian's uncle Miraz, reigning Hamlet-esque in his nephew's place, having murdered his brother, Caspian IX, has decreed that modern Telmarine children, including his nephew, should not be taught tales of old Narnia or the true history of their origins. The film of Prince Caspian opens with a depiction of Caspian's close connection with his tutor, Dr. Cornelius, a half-dwarf who ignores King Miraz's instructions and teaches Caspian the truth about himself and history. It may be telling that Dr. Cornelius cut short a history lesson by turning to a grammar book similar to the one Lewis dissects in his first chapter of Abolition. This has been accepted Telmarine culture for centuries, and thus they are unprepared for a fight against what they considered mythical creatures. To quote chapter 14, "The sort of history that was taught in Narnia under Miraz's rule was duller than the truest history you ever read, and less true than the most exciting adventure story." To transpose this scenario into our world, we would see children being taught a doctored history with emphasis on the exclusion of any supernatural events and thus supernatural agents. History gets most exciting, in my estimation, when it is used to examine God's progressive revelation. Yet we constantly find throughout academia an exclusion of just those things which make subjects worth studying. Ravi Zacharias likes to recite a poem by Steve Turner which sums up the creed of modern academic culture. "We believe in Marx, Freud and Darwin. We believe everything is okay, as long as you don't hurt anyone, to the best of your definition of hurt and to the best of your knowledge. We believe in sex before, during and after marriage. We believe in the therapy of sin. We believe that adultery is fun. We believe that Sodom is okay. We believe that taboos are taboo. We believe that everything's getting better, despite evidence to the contrary. The evidence must be investigated, and you can prove anything with evidence. We believe that there's something in horoscopes, UFOs and bent spoons. Jesus was a good man, just like Buddha, Muhammad and ourselves. He was a good moral teacher, although we think his good morals were bad. We believe that all religions are basically the same. At least the one that we read was. They all believe in love, goodness. They only differ on matters of creation, sin, heaven, hell, God and salvation. We believe that after death comes the nothing, because when you ask the dead what happens, they say nothing. If death is not the end, if the dead have lied, then it's compulsory heaven for all, excepting perhaps Hitler, Stalin and Genghis Khan. We believe in Masters and Johnson. What's selected is average, what's average is normal, what's normal is good. We believe in total disarmament. We believe that there are direct links between warfare and bloodshed. Americans should beat their guns into tractors, and the Russians would be sure to follow. We believe that man is essentially good. It's only his behaviour that lets him down. This is the fault of society. Society is the fault of conditions. Conditions are the fault of society. We believe that each man must find the truth that is right for him. Reality will adapt accordingly. The universe will readjust. History will alter. We believe that there is no absolute truth, accepting the truth that there is no absolute truth. We believe in the rejection of creeds and the flowering of individual thought. We daily imbibe a host of views which are presented as unquestionable truth. It would be all too easy to neglect to consider whether these things are in line with our own beliefs or stand utterly counterpoised to them. Whether this be through formal education or the media or through the society of our colleagues and friends, it is a constant barrage of seemingly universally accepted truths. Three such areas are the Zeitgeist, Prescriptive Pluralism, and Evolution. We're going to critically consider these together now. Zeitgeist. Every day we are bombarded with this vision of the world from the media and even our colleagues and family. It is the Zeitgeist, or spirit of our time. The poem I just read is a tongue-in-cheek look at the internal inconsistencies in postmodern thought, and is a stinging indictment on this age. I'm sure you can think of more examples which you can leave in the comments section for the edification of the Way of the Lion community. In the 1940s and 50s, Lewis viewed the main threat coming from philosophical and moral subjectivism. This threat has decomposed into a bankrupt system of thought which undergirds our current zeitgeist, like a worm-riddled rotten joist holding up a leaky roof made of asbestos and moss. It might keep off some of the rain, but it will kill you in the end. A good measure of what the agenda is to review Ofsted's standards. Here we see a distinct double standard when looking at bullying, teaching on gender and sex, and acceptable procedure in assemblies. In a climate where the Trojan horse plot was allowed to gain ground, where anti-Christian chants are common practice in Muslim-majority schools in our capital and second city, where increasing numbers of primary pupils are being homeschooled after being quizzed by Ofsted inspectors about their view of homosexuality and having transgenderism encouraged, we can only expect the fruit to be negative. Prescriptive pluralism. Pluralism is not a bad thing. In many ways, it's a very beautiful and laudable thing. British society has been pluralistic for over 2,000 years, and we've grown stronger by accepting successive invaders' customs and cultures. The English language has more words than any other language in the world, precisely because we have synonyms of so many words with roots in different languages of peoples whom we have colonised or who colonised us. When we're describing British culture, it's right to describe it as having a plurality of cultures incorporated. But there are two sorts of pluralism: descriptive and prescriptive. Descriptive is saying that this is the state of affairs that obtains, which has benefits and challenges, and prescriptive is saying that this is the way that things should and must be. Britain became cosmopolitan through the rise and fall of empires, including its own, and the increased mobility of the global population has created a new source. We have to accept that it is this way, and let our guiding principle be Christian love. But the more recent trend of wishing to promote pluralism as an end to be achieved at the expense of historically assumed norms and accepted meta-narratives, large stories, including that of Christianity, is dangerous and riddled with problems. Chief among the problems is the narrative that all religions are basically the same. This is demonstrably false and reliant upon Jejune pragmatism. At best, religions are superficially the same on some matters of ethics, which is to be expected, as Lewis explains in Mere Christianity. This law was called the law of nature because people thought that everyone knew it by nature and did not need to be taught it. They did not mean, of course, that you might not find an odd individual here and there who did not know it, just as you find a few people who are colourblind or have no ear for a tune. But taking the race as a whole, they thought that the human idea of decent behaviour was obvious to everyone, and I believe they were right. I know that some people say the idea of a law of nature or decent behaviour known to all men is unsound, because different civilizations and different ages have had quite different moralities. But this is not true. There have been differences between their moralities, but these have never amounted to anything like a total difference. If anyone will take the trouble to compare the moral teaching of, say, the ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, Hindus, Chinese, Greeks, and Romans, what will really strike him will be how very like they are to each other and to our own. But, as the poem said, religions differ on matters of creation, sin, heaven, hell, God, and salvation. These are the fundamentals of belief structures. Thus, as Ravi says, religions are at best superficially similar and fundamentally different. Thus, the narrative of prescriptive pluralism can only end in conflict. Evolution. This issue will be tackled in more depth in Magician's Nephew, but it is worth mentioning that the philosophical belief in evolution, as distinct from the properly scientific belief, is discussed in fiction, classrooms, news reports, and lecture theatres completely immune from challenge. Indeed, if it is ever challenged, the ad hominem attacks that come from a range of sources are enough to discourage anyone from doing likewise. Let me briefly describe what I mean. The scientific study of evolution shows much diversification within a class of organism, such as bacteria, whose generations are so brief that useful data can be gleaned rapidly. The same is true of insects and even birds. This can be legitimately extrapolated for some mammals and larger animals with longer generations. There has, however, never been an observed case of one genus evolving to another. Birds remain birds, bacteria remain bacteria, and thus we can legitimately assume that mammals have always remained mammals. Yet this is not what Doctor Who and the national curriculum teach. They present a fairy story of abiogenesis, that is, life coming from non-life, as has never been observed or tested. Indeed, the most likely mechanics suggested for this relies on odds which would in any other setting be regarded as miraculous. To allow for this, they postulate a very early date for the formation of the Earth. which some evidence supports, but creates a huge raft of anomalies, such as carbon-14 in diamonds, which would normally cast doubt on the whole theory. When this is suggested, the charge of religious extremism is levelled, along with the emotive rhetoric that comes with it. There is, in post-Christian Britain, where I am recording, an undercurrent of nervousness about those holding a religious faith. Mentioning the gospel can cause alarm in secular workplaces. An insensitive presentation can also do irreparable harm to your mission by building a barrier between you and your friend, as well as any potential onlookers. We don't want to become known as God-botherers, and thus the office or school pariah. Against this eventuality, Lewis offers two pieces of advice from the example of Dr. Cornelius, witnessing to the young Caspian. First, be aware of your cultural milieu. At the time of making this video, I suggest that Britain is in a state of low-grade persecution. Secondly, be careful about how, where and when you engage in these conversations. When we present our apologetic case, we must be aware of the cultural milieu in which it is being heard. We are not yet at the stage of persecution like our brothers and sisters in North Korea or the Islamic world face, nor as the old Narnians faced in Prince Caspian. We will not be physically harmed for our faith, nor imprisoned, but we will almost certainly be laughed at if we do not pick our arguments and audience carefully. Dr. Cornelius didn't teach Miraz the truth about Aslan, nor include Aslanology in his lesson plans for Caspian. There is good reason not to cast your pearls before swine. If people get used to laughing at good argument, it inoculates them against ever gaining wisdom. As Screwtape says, "But flippancy is the best of all. In the first place, it is very economical. Only a clever human can make a real joke about virtue, or indeed about anything else. Any of them can be trained to talk as if virtue were funny. Among flippant people, the joke is always assumed to have been made. No one actually makes it, but every serious subject is discussed in a manner which implies that they have already found a ridiculous side to it. If prolonged, the habit of flippancy builds up around a man the finest armour plating against the enemy, that's God, that I know, and it is quite free from the dangers inherent in the other sources of laughter. It is 1,000 miles away from joy. It deadens instead of sharpening the intellect. It excites no affection between those who practice it." Screwtape Letters number 11. Dr. Cornelius chose a deserted tower carefully to teach Caspian about true Narnian history. This seems to be a very wise decision, and one we should take seriously. The free days of preaching the gospel on the street or workplace are threatened. I personally have lost jobs for speaking about my Christian faith in a secular environment, and there have been numerous cases of similar low-grade persecution, from wearing crosses in the NHS or British Airways to prosecuting healers on the streets for reading homophobic or Islamophobic passages from the Bible in public. But we are not yet at the point where people are breaking down the doors of church to hear the gospel or be made disciples. So our approach must be somewhere in between. I suggest a 3-point strategy based on Dr. Cornelius' example. Like Dr. Cornelius, we should start by winning trust and legitimacy to speak into someone's life. This is most readily done by forging friendships. Our Christian values, which prioritize love over all things, make this an easier task for us than our non-Christian selves would have had it. Jesus himself ate and drank with sinners and tax collectors, Matthew 9:10. When we find someone who is asking questions and seeking truth for truth's sake, we put ourselves into a position to answer these questions through building up a good apologetic. You could say, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, 1 Peter 3:15. And finally, share the gospel carefully and lovingly, so you don't give the scoffers and mockers, who we have been told in beforehand will come in times of persecution, 2 Peter 3:3, any cause to steal away seeds or mock the gospel to their own destruction. One could almost say, but do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behaviour in Christ may be ashamed of their slander, 1 Peter 3:15 and 16. It is in this tower that we can do our alpha courses, have our life groups, indulge in those meaty and satisfying conversations which lift both you and your friends up to see the glory of God in Christ Jesus. And now it's your turn. What lessons are you taught and reinforced daily through the media and postmodern assumptions? Pause and discuss. Of course, it is important to remember that not everything about the Zeitgeist is bad. The oppression of homosexuals, women and ethnic minorities are evils which the Zeitgeist rightly condemns, but were unquestioningly prevalent in earlier times. There are many things which we can embrace as Christians, but there are other assumptions which we must reject as clear evils. Discuss what we can embrace and what we are obliged to challenge. Leave your ideas in the comment section. Press pause now. Thank you for accompanying me on this brief discussion of oppressive education. Our aims today were to compare Caspian's education with our own, to consider what things we are taught every day, and how to make a sensitive presentation of the Christian faith. If we met these goals together, please consider liking the video and leaving a comment. If you would like to join me for the next part of this series, when we will consider worldview thinking, then don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell. Until next time, God bless.